Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something, well, something you probably have thoughts on already. This whole idea of which meats are good for you and which are maybe bad.
Yeah, the common thinking, right? Red meat bad, chicken's okay, fish is great.
Exactly. You've probably heard that a million times, but we're going to dig into that today based on a really interesting source one of you sent over, a YouTube transcript, actually.
We might just, flip some of those ideas around.
That's the plan. Our mission here is to get past those simple labels, look at different meats, sure, but especially how they're raised.
Because that seems to be key. We want to give you a clearer and honestly probably quite surprising picture.
We know you want the real insights fast without wading through noise, so let's do this deep dive.
Let's cut through it. Okay, so challenging those basics first.
Right, this good versus bad thing. Red meat's the villain, chicken and white meats are the heroes.
Pretty much the standard advice. And fish is like the health superhero. We should also remember pork, often called the other white meat.
Ah, yeah, the marketing term.
But biologically, it's red meat. Just looks paler when you cook it.
Okay. And the standard advice comes down to worries about what? Saturated fat, cholesterol.
Exactly, that connection to heart disease that we've heard about for, well, decades.
I bet, and this is where our source comes in, that whole story might be a bit off.
Yeah, it seems a lot of that conventional wisdom might not be quite right, which gets really interesting when you actually look at the fat content.
So total fat, you'd think, okay, red meat must have way more than chicken, right? Simple as that.
That's the intuition. But the source shows it's way more nuanced. The fat percentage varies hugely within a type of meat. Depends on the cut.
Like, give me an example. Beef.
Okay, beef. A super lean cut, maybe 5 or 6% fat. But fattier cut, like say short ribs or something, could be 25, even 30%.
Wow, okay. Big range. What about pork?
Pork averages, maybe a bit over 10% fat. But again, depends heavily on the cut. Think loin versus belly.
Right. And chicken.
Chicken, like a whole cooked bird, is generally under 10%. But if you're eating skin on thighs, that number creeps up.
And salmon, the fatty fish.
Comes in around 13%. So, not drastically different from some cuts of pork or even leaner beef sometimes.
Plus cooking matters too, right? Like rendering fat from ground beef.
Exactly. You drain that off, the final fat content changes.
So the takeaway on total fat is it's not really about red versus white versus fish.
Not primarily, no. It's much more about the specific cut you choose and maybe how you cook it. But the types of fat, that's where the story really unfolds.
Okay, types of fat. Let's break that down. The source talks about MUFAs first, monounsaturated fatty acids.
Yeah, the ones we associate with olive oil, avocados, the good fats.
And they're in meat too.
Surprisingly high amounts, actually. Beef fat, around 45% MUFA.
45%? Wow.
Pork is pretty similar. Chicken's a bit lower, maybe 35%. Even salmon fat is about 40% MUFA.
So that supposedly healthy fat is a big chunk in all of them. That's unexpected.
Definitely challenges the simple narrative.
Okay, what about the infamous saturated fatty acids? The ones everyone worries about.
Well, the source makes a key point. Saturated fat isn't automatically bad, especially if it's from a healthy, well-raised animal.
Right, the context matters. So what are the levels like?
Beef fat is around 40% saturated. Pork, maybe 35%. Chicken, around 30%. And salmon is lower, down around 20%.
So again, they all have significant amounts. Differences, yes, but it's not like red meat is all saturated and others have none.
Not at all. And then there's cholesterol, the other big worry.
How does that compare across the board?
Per 100 grams. It's remarkably similar. Beef, around 80 milligrams. Pork, about the same. Chicken, also similar levels. Salmon, slightly less, but not dramatically so.
Okay, so cholesterol levels are also pretty close. This is really shifting the picture.
It really does. So if you add up the MUFAs and the saturated fats, that's most of the fat, right?
Yeah, the source said like 85% for beef, a bit less for pork and chicken, maybe 60 for salmon.
Exactly. Which leaves the remainder, the polyunsaturated fatty acids, or PUFAs.
And this is where things get really critical for health.
This seems to be a major factor. PUFAs include both omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. Now, we need both.
But the balance is off in modern diets.
Way off.
Yeah.
We tend to get far too much omega-6, mostly from processed foods, vegetable oils, that kind of thing. And excess omega-6 can be pro-inflammatory.
Whereas omega-3s are generally anti-inflammatory.
Correct. So it's not just the total PUFAs, it's that ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 that's crucial.
Okay, so how do the meats stack up on total PUFAs first?
Here we see bigger differences. Beef is quite low, like 4.5 to 5.5%.
Okay.
Pork is higher, maybe 10 to 20%.
Each.
Even higher, 15 up to 30%. And salmon, way up there, 40 to 50% PUFA.
Huge variation there. And this is where how the animals are raised makes all the difference.
Absolutely critical. The source dives into this, comparing, say, grass-fed beef versus conventionally raised.
Conventionally raised often means CAFOs, right? Concentrated animal feeding operations.
Exactly, those big industrial setups. Now look at the PUFAs in beef. Total PUFA might be only slightly higher in grass-fed.
But the ratio is completely different.
Grass-fed beef, you're looking at an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of maybe 2.1 up to maybe 4.1. That's considered really healthy, near optimal.
And the CAFO beef.
That ratio blows out. It can be 10.1, even 20.1, tons of omega-6, very little omega-3. Big difference.
Wow. And is it a similar story for pork and chicken?
Pretty much, yeah. Pasture-raised pork still has more PUFA than beef, but its ratio is maybe around 10.1.
Which is already less ideal than grass-fed beef.
Right. But CAO pork, even worse. Ratio can hit 20.1, sometimes even 30.1, worse than the CFO beef.
Goodness. And chicken.
Similar pattern. Free-range chicken might have a ratio around 5.1 to 8.1. Still higher in omega-6 than grass-fed beef, but okay.
But the standard supermarket, CFO chicken.
Ratio jumps to 15.1, maybe 20.1. But remember, chicken has a higher total PUFA percentage to begin with, so that imbalance has a bigger impact. Most of that increase is omega-6.
Okay, so the way they're raised fundamentally changes the fat profile, especially that crucial omega balance. What about salmon? Wild versus farmed.
Salmon's the omega-3 star, right?
Wow.
Both wild and farmed have really high PUFA levels, 35–50%.
But the type of PFA matters.
Exactly. In salmon, omega-3 dominates. Wild salmon has an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of about 1 to 4. That means 4 times more omega-3 than omega-6. Really potent.
And farmed salmon.
Still good, still provides omega-3s, but the ratio shifts. It's more like 1.1, maybe up to 2.1.
Yeah.
So significantly less omega-3 relative to omega-6 compared to wild. Still beneficial, but not quite the powerhouse wild salmon is.
That makes sense depending on what they're fed in the farms. Okay, this omega ratio thing is huge. Now, the source also mentioned TMAO, trimethylamine and oxide.
Ah, yes, TMAO. It's been linked to red meat and heart health concerns.
How does it work again?
Basically, certain gut bacteria break down compounds like choline and carnitine, which are found in animal products, producing TMA. Your liver then turns that TMA into TMAO.
And high TMAO levels have been seen in people with heart or kidney problems.
Yes, there's a correlation in people who are already sick. But the source emphasizes correlation isn't causation. And crucially,
What?
in healthy people with a healthy gut microbiome and good metabolism, red meat consumption doesn't seem to significantly spike TMAO levels.
Okay, so maybe the worry about red meat and TMAO is a bit overblown for healthy individuals?
It seems that way based on this info. But then comes the twist.
There's always a twist.
Fish, the heart-healthy superstar. Fish can contain loads of preformed TMAO, like 10 to 50 times more than red meat or other animal products.
Wait, what? Seriously? Fish has more TMAO?
According to the source, yes.
Yeah.
Significantly more. That's a real head-scratcher, isn't it? Totally challenges the standard advice.
Wow. Okay, that definitely complicates the picture. So considering all this, the fat types, the omega ratios, the raising practices, TMAO, the source, actually ranks them.
It does, yeah. And it's pretty interesting. Tied for the top spot, number one, are grass-fed beef and wild salmon.
Okay, why those two?
Grass-fed beef gets praised for being clean when raised well, organically, naturally, plus that great omega ratio, and it has CLA conjugated linoleic acid, which has potential benefits.
In wild salmon?
Best source of those really important EPA and DHA omega-3s, though the source does caution moderation, potential toxins in wild fish being a consideration.
Makes sense. Okay, who's next? Tight for third.
Free-range pork and free-range chicken.
So, better than conventional, but not quite top tier.
Right. They're cleaner options if raised well, allowed to forage and roam, but their omega ratio isn't as good as grass-fed beef or wild salmon, more omega-6 heavy. And cultural or religious points about pork are mentioned too.
Got it. Then fifth place?
Farmed salmon.
Still beneficial for omega-3, is just not as much as wild.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Less potent omega-3 profile because of the feed, and the source mentions artificial coloring sometimes being used.
Right, to get that pink color. Okay, and then the bottom tier.
Grouped together. CAFO beef, CAFO pork, and CFA chicken.
The conventionally industrially raised meats.
Yeah. Ranked lowest because of the poor conditions, antibiotic use is common, and crucially, those really skewed omega-6 to omega-3 ratios we talked about.
So the bottom line really is, how it's raised matters. A lot.
Fundamentally,
Yeah.
it's less about the animal species and much more about its diet, its living conditions, in its whole life, really.
That's a massive shift from red meat bad, chicken good. But wait, the source goes one step further, doesn't it? Talking about the real worst meat.
It does. So we've talked about the quality of the animal itself, but then there's what happens after that, processing.
Ah, so moving beyond just the cut of meat to
Mm.
things like deli meats, sausages, nuggets.
Exactly, processed meats. And this applies regardless of the original animal source, beef, pork, chicken, whatever.
Because they add stuff.
Loads of stuff. The source lists things like artificial flavors,
Hmm.
colors, sugars, often high fructose corn syrup preservatives, chemical additives, modified starches, soy protein isolate, binders, fillers. The
So
list goes on.
any specific examples that stand out?
Oh, yeah. Chicken nuggets, often less than 50% actual chicken, and it's usually CAOFO chicken. The rest, chemicals, wheat, soy, more omega-6, and then fried and omega-6 oils,
So a triple whammy of problematic ingredients.
pretty much. And things like fish sticks, Vienna sausages, Spam, corned beef, similar story. Fillers, chemicals, artificial junk. Most standard deli meats fall into this category, too.
It's just a chemical cocktail, really. Are there any better processed options?
Yes, the source does point that out. You can find processed meats made from grass-fed or naturally raised animals. They tend to have fewer artificial additives,
And they might use natural preservatives.
like celery powder for nitrates instead of synthetic ones, which is generally seen as a better option. Organic versions are even better, fewer pesticides involved in the animal feed, etc.
Okay, so there are levels even within processed meats. But the standard stuff sounds pretty bad.
It really reinforces that ironic twist, doesn't it? The idea that red meat is the bad guy and chicken is the safe bet. Well, when you look at CPO chicken, especially processed TPO chicken products, versus, say, grass-fed beef,
The picture completely reverses.
largely, yes, according to this analysis anyway. And you have to think about advertising, right? Fast food marketing plays a huge role in pushing certain perceptions.
Absolutely. That CA faux chicken, especially in processed form, sounds like something to avoid regularly.
The source strongly advises against it, yeah.
Yeah.
Due to the omega imbalance, the potential additives, the way it's raised.
Okay, so let's wrap this deep dive up. What's the single biggest message you think people should take away?
I think it's that the quality, the health impact of meat. It's determined way more by how that animal lived and what happened to the meat afterwards than just its simple category, red, white, or fish.
We've definitely moved beyond those basic and maybe wrong assumptions today.
Hopefully you have a much more nuanced picture now, yeah.
And that final point about processing, it leaves you thinking, what is the most dangerous meat?
Maybe it's not a type of animal at all. Maybe the real danger lies in the products of, well, industrial agriculture and heavy processing. That's something for you to chew on.
Definitely food for thought. Perhaps it encourages us all to look a bit closer, maybe find local farms, definitely read labels more carefully.
And just generally question the standard dietary advice sometimes.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for diving deep with us on this one. We hope it's given you some power to make more informed choices.